Warren Bird with the privilege of talking with Dr. Robert A. Schuller, Robert Anthony Schuller, son of the founder of the Crystal Cathedral. Robert was pastor of the Crystal Cathedral, senior pastor from 2006 to 2008. He was also been involved in the Crystal Cathedral at many different points before and after. So today, let me ask you a few questions that will help all of us understand this issue of succession better. First up, to what extent was the succession issue at the Crystal Cathedral more about getting a successor for a television ministry than for a local church?
Well, that's a loaded question. And the reason it's a loaded question is because the cathedral congregation was merged with the Crystal Cathedral Ministries. Crystal Cathedral Ministries is the television broadcast, the Hour of Power. Crystal Cathedral Congregation is the local congregation. It's the Crystal Cathedral Congregation started in 1955 when my father moved out here and started holding services in the drive-in theater. That congregation was a member of the Reformed Church in America. And then in 1970, my father started the television television broadcast and kept it completely separate. And I think the main motivation for that was actually his fear that the television portion could financially, if it didn't go well, could have the potential of bankrupting the church. He didn't want to have any negative financial impacts of the television ministry to have negative impacts on the congregation. But what happened was quite a bit different. Instead of it becoming a financial burden, it became a financial asset and started helping to fund all of the construction. The cathedral would not stand if it wasn't for the Hour of Power, the cathedral buildings. Coming back to the question, what really was a succession? It was, for me, it was absolutely both. I was installed as a senior pastor of the Crystal Cathedral congregation, which is also the president of the Hour of Power. At the time I was there, the Hour of Power was calling all the shots because they owned, by that time they owned all the buildings and grounds. There was a time when the board decided, or my father decided, to give all the buildings and grounds from the local congregation to the Hour of Power. And so the local congregation, as far as control, as far as making decisions, became quite insignificant.
What's the most critical thing that you've learned from your experience 2006 to 2008, both going in and coming out of the succession?
I think it's something that the Presbyterian Church, or some Presbyterian denominations have, if I understand, have learned a long time ago, and that is that the former leadership must resign and really get out of the way. The Crystal Cathedral would still be in the hands of the Crystal Cathedral Ministries. The assets and the buildings would still be in the hands of the Crystal Cathedral Ministries if my father would simply have walked away. When I accepted the role as the next senior pastor, he had agreed to become an ambassador at large and raise funds for the endowment fund. He didn't do that. Instead, he became a sounding board for my sisters and other people who didn't particularly care for the new direction for whatever reasons. And there's lots of reasons that people don't really care for that. And as a result of that, undermined my authority and my my ability to lead the congregation, and ultimately had me removed and gave the authority to someone else who relieved me. And there's no question in my mind whatsoever, had I been given the proper authority that went along with the responsibility I had, and had my father simply turned to those who came to him and said, I don't have anything to do with that anymore, that it would have been a very, very successful transition, because we did lots of things very right.
Go a little deeper on that, if you would, because there are any number of churches where the founding pastor or the long-term senior pastor has put heart, soul, everything they have into the church. They're now handing the baton to someone else, and they're in their minds thinking, I'm going to shift over to this thing. What are some tips to help people like that let go and truly make the transition, whether it was in your case to raising funds for the endowment and be the ambassador at large, or to some other ministry?
I think it's very, very difficult, maybe impossible for some pastors, especially founding pastors. I look at my dad and I look at other people like him who are lions and tigers and who all their life are successful because they're successful because they wouldn't let go. That's what made them a success. They would face challenges and they go, okay, I'm not going to let this thing stop me. And they would bulldoze through it and they'd make it happen. So it's counterintuitive to their personality, to everything they've learned throughout their entire life, to let go. I mean, it is extremely difficult. I think it was difficult for my father, but compounding that was the fact that his mental capacities were slipping. They became pretty noticeable to me, and pretty critical by the year 2000. And that's one of the reasons I went back to the cathedral in 2000 and became co-pastor with my father. By 2006, he wasn't able to follow a program and know when it was time for him to stand up and do his part of the worship. I had to prod him. And by 2008, he really didn't have the ability to. He was really out of control as far as making decisions, and people were making decisions for him. And so had he had established the cathedral in such a way before he left that the succession would be successful. And then what he needed to have done was just to completely walk away. But unfortunately, he didn't do that.
Sometimes in a succession, especially in a high visibility church, the media spotlight is intense and it's not what you want. Talk about how do you handle the personal pressure of it and how best to respond when the media is there.
You know, I've always had a real good experience with the media. So I think it's really important that no matter what you're facing, you're transparent, you're open, and you're always in front of the media. You want to be able to, if there's something you're concerned about, get your story out first. Send out a press release, talk to the media so that they're not surprised by anything. You're upfront, you're transparent, it's pretty basic media 101. Even if you're done something that you're shameful of or you're embarrassed about, get out in front and just be honest and open and transparent and deal with it. Man up. How do you deal with the pressure? It's just part of the job. If you can't deal with the pressure, you probably should look for another job.
Any other advice? What you did right, what you didn't do right on successful pastoral succession?
Pastors like my father who have given their entire life to these ministries and in many cases have made tremendous financial contributions and sacrifices need to be taken into account their financial needs to be able to retire, and should be given an annual salary or compensation until they pass, so that does not become an issue of the senior pastor deciding to stay. Because I think there's a lot of senior pastors who stay in there a lot longer than they should, only because they don't know what they're going to do financially if they resign. They're going to take such a financial hit that they can't. And it's a small price to pay, and it may seem like a heavy price, but to help them maintain their lifestyle to the day they die, so that the church can move on. And it's a small price to pay. So one of the problems with the transition that I never anticipated was the fact that my sisters never felt like they were given an opportunity to have a shot, I guess you'd say, at being the senior pastor of the cathedral, because they were women. And from my dad's perspective, at his age, women were not allowed to be ordained in the Reformed Church in America. So he never really thought about that. At the same time, they didn't take, active direction towards being ordained. By the time they were in college, they were ordaining women in the Reformed Church in America. So they could have gone on to seminary, and they didn't. But as a result of that created an animosity towards me that finally kind of had a participation in my parents making some of the decisions they made in the future. So it was really I don't think it's anyone's fault per se, but it just kind of happened. My suspicion is if that's happening in my family, it probably happens in other families that have more than one child. So you have these natural, my guess is that they're natural sibling rivalries that we see even throughout the Bible that takes place. And I'm not sure how to deal with them. But again, I believe in dealing with almost all problems the same way, and that is transparency, openness, and just heading it straight on and calling a spade and identifying the big white elephant in the room, and instead of just trying to cover them up. And so I just wanted to bring that out, that family dynamics, sibling rivalry, et cetera, is very real and can have problems and challenges if not dealt with honestly, openly, and forthrightly. And I think my parents tried to do that by giving my kids, my sisters, different responsibilities in the church, but ultimately it ended up being a fiasco.
All this build-up to your great succession, if that hadn't been mapped out in writing, then there's a good likelihood that in an awful lot of other churches, likewise, it's not mapped out with the clarity that it needs to be.
Yeah, I think I don't think I don't think succession is difficult from a logical standpoint, and from a mathematical standpoint, and from a cognitive standpoint. I think it's extremely difficult from a psychological, emotional, and spiritual standpoint.
Wise words from Robert A. Schuller of his vast experience with the Crystal Cathedral. Thank you, Robert.
You're welcome.